to Alliance Talk, Driving Climate Adaptation, Innovative Finance for Crisis-Affected Contexts. Please welcome to the stage Shogo Akagawa from Nikkei Asia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Thank you very much for joining us today for this session. I think we are living in many crises are shaking the world over. Some countries are running away from free trade, unfortunately ignoring rule of law and focusing on the short-term goal. Nationalism and populism gaining their power. This makes more difficult to fight climate change or create fair society. We are where we are heading to. Climate change is not only an environmental crisis, it's a threat, especially in fragile and conflict-affected regions. Yet despite the urgent need, these regions receive far too little climate finance. What should we do? How we can solve it? So today, we are here to discuss these challenges with fantastic participants and speakers. Mr. Anand, State Secretary for Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, is one of the best-known German politicians of the Social Democrat Party, SPD, and an expert on international politics. Thank you very much for joining us. And it's my honor to introduce a distinguished diplomat, the ambassador of Brazil to Germany, Roberto Jaguaribe. Before coming to Berlin, he serves as Brazil's ambassador to the United Kingdom in London, where I currently live. And he also has experience in Asia, in China, and in Mongolia. And Professor Anna Katarina Hornich is a director of the leading think tank for development policy, German Institute of Development and Sustainability. And she's a professor at the University of Bonn. She studied not only in Germany, but in Singapore, and advising German federal government, European Union, and United Nations. Thank you very much for joining us. And let me introduce Gloria Vomizzo, Head of Humanitarian Solutions at the African Risk Capacity, a specialized agency of the African Union. She's an expert in insurance solutions. Her previous role as international consulting firm or French insurance company brings strong expertise to her current position. Thank you very much for joining us. And Alyoscia D'Onofrio is a vice president for technical excellence at the International Rescue Committee, which has a century of traditions of humanitarian aid. He's contributing to maximize the foundation for aid and sustainability. So my name is Shogo Akagawa. I'm editor-at-large for Japanese newspaper Nikkei, specializing for international relations. Born in Japan and grew up in Germany, and now living in London. So I'm happy to contribute to promote international mutual understanding. So we will discuss 20 minutes, followed by 20 minutes question and answer sections. And my first questions to State Secretary Anand. Germany and the EU have been regarded as pioneer or benchmark when it comes to climate change. Now, everybody is observing, me as a journalist as well, what will happen under new grand coalition, because Germany has a lot of multiple headwinds, sluggish macroeconomic development, less capacity on financial policy currently. So what kind of policy stance do you want to implement toward COP30?
Well, first of all, thank you for moderating our session and for the kind introduction. I want to go straight to the question that you asked. I think if you had an opportunity to listen to the Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister this morning, you get a good sense about the priorities of the new government. And I think you could easily identify that there is continuity in Germany's basic policy orientation. That is one clear message. We remain a predictable partner in the international community. We are, with a lot of effort, preparing for Belém with our Brazilian friends and partners, as we have been for the previous COPs. The truth, however, is also that Germany is not isolated from global trends. We had, for German standards at least, a rather polarized election campaign, and the question of international aid of development expenditures was part of that discussion. So I think you will get part of your answer once we finished our budget process. I want to be very honest with you. But everybody here can contribute to a debate and to strengthen the arguments to convince our parliament that what we have clearly outlined in our coalition treaty with very strong language for our multilateral obligations will then also be the German policy. I think that in times where there are economic uncertainties, where people are concerned about making ends meet, and I think, you know, what we witnessed here, the impact of COVID, inflation, etc., to some of our foreign guests, it might not sound very dramatic in comparison to what many of our partners in the Global South went through. And they have a point. However, that's not a convincing argument in the internal discussion. But I think, and the Vice Chancellor, our new development minister, both made it very clear. I'm very confident that we can make a convincing argument to our own people that everything we invest in adaptation and mitigation, every euro cent we invest in making Belém a success is an investment in our own best interest and also in our own prosperity and security. And I think if we look at the effects of climate change, and maybe a little bit over my time, but I want to tell you that what I witnessed in my work in the Development Cooperation Ministry is that we developed instruments with our partners in the Global South, global risk against a global shield against climate risks. That all of a sudden is part of a discussion in Europe as well, because we see that the effects of climate change, they are unevenly divided, but they are also reaching our own shores. So this is an unfortunate development, but it gives us a new argument to convince our own public that that's what we do is the right investment. And so I think our partners can be confident that Germany can be counted on.
Thank you. Ambassador Jaguaribe, also State Secretary Mr. Nannen mentioned about Global South, and now you are hosting now upcoming COP30 in this autumn. But the Trump administration has already withdrawn from the Paris climate agreement, and we observe now trade war between China and US. So what is the Brazilian stance on upcoming COP30? Do you have some magic to unite the world in this conference?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for hosting this panel and for mediating it. It's a very important issue. I must say that I'm very glad to hear what the State Secretary had to say, Mr. Annan, about German commitments. I have been here long enough to know that they do indeed have a commitment. But at the same time, I like to say that everything is relative. And I will tell you a phrase that I use here sometimes to catch attention. The greatest aspiration we can have is to have German problems. For some countries, it's even beyond an aspiration. It's something unattainable. And especially for the countries that are the part of this issue here. And I would say not just German, but European problems in general. And we are facing, as you well put, this is a gigantic issue. We are in a COP that traditionally would be representative of something because we are 10 years from Paris, 20 years from Kyoto, so we're expecting a lot. But the first task, I think you already told us what it is. The first task is to a full commitment to multilateralism, to show that this is the only solution, that global problems require global convergence, global consultation, and we have the mechanisms to deal with that. In fact, to a very large extent, I think the effort of the COPs has been basically successful. We have reached very important decisions. We are facing an enormous crisis. Implementation is a problem. And that's why the first commitment is to attempt to reestablish the credibility of the multilateral negotiating system. And I am sure that all the parties that are going there are committed to this cause. And we have to achieve an agreement. There are many complicated sectors. I think that we also believe that Paris requires a faster implementation. We have to pay perhaps less attention to the process of negotiations and more attention to implementation. But there are very important pending issues, financing being not the least of them. Including the issue that we're dealing with here today. This is something that goes beyond climate change. It goes beyond the environment. It's a threat, as you said. But it also goes beyond COP. It's an issue that has to be treated on a different level. We, as a country that hosted the G20 last year, introduced a global task force against poverty and hunger. This is directly related to this issue. In fact, inheriting a proposal that Germany made in the G7, and they very generously included everything in and they were first country to adhere to our suggestion. And this is something Brazil has been continuously committed to, because we believe we have a global responsibility in this respect. I mean, to have people hungry in a world with such affluence is really unacceptable. And I think the issues that we're treating here are very much related to that. So, not to prolong myself, I think the first issue is really to reestablish the relevance, the centrality, and the necessity of multilateralism and dealing with these issues together. And this is the focus that we will have in Belém in November this year.
Thank you. Next question, so Professor Honeth, because Ambassador just mentioned about the importance of multilateralism, but in the fact, the principle of multilateralism and the rule of law, this pillar of global order since, I would say, end of the World War II, is now facing strong headwind. And you wrote recently a very interesting policy paper, which is titled Rules versus Deals. So from your point of view, those changes in international politics could affect climate adaptation or not?
Yeah, thank you so much. We see indeed over the past months increasingly the logic of deals unfolding. And of course, deals means that it's a bilateralization in many ways of interactions. It's undermining the multilateral structures that you emphasize, but also the plurilateral, the G20 or the G7, which are all structures that, I mean, the plurilateral logic basically would be to prepare decisions that then become more likely to be also confirmed or taken on the multilateral level. Within the field of climate, you already mentioned that the US stepped out of the Paris Agreement. We see similar effects also on the regional level, no? So moving into making deals with individual countries, between individual, always two countries, means actually disintegration of integration projects. It means a weakening not just of the multilateral and the plurilateral, the group-based formats, but also regional integration projects. The European Union, also the ASEAN or the African Union or the African Continental Free Trade Area. These are also all important regional integration projects that are based on the logic of rules. And reliable rules that determine interaction and then make also reliable interaction possible. If this is being replaced by deal-based or increasingly, I mean, deals have always taken place, but increasingly deals becoming the norm, it weakens any interaction. And of course, it weakens also very much so climate action. If we think of voluntary national targets that are being implemented or pursued. Yeah? This is voluntary, so it relies on the joint commitment of member states and of the international community to move forward on climate mitigation and adaptation, of course. If that is undermined, overall the multilateral process is weakened. At the same time, climate is one of those areas, I fully agree with you, where we have seen over the past years that the multilateral mechanisms continue to work, even if at a very slow speed.
Additional questions of accessing innovative climate financing. Is this hurdle will be more higher or lower in the future? What do you think?
Right. Innovative climate financing and the mobilizing for climate, whether it's finances or political will and political action, has to increase. There's no choice. Any not mobilizing for it now means that we encounter substantially higher costs, financial but also political and especially human costs at a later stage. The effects are substantial. Last year we have experienced the first year globally where we have exceeded the 1.5 degrees warming on average. And we know that for climate financing, the challenges are substantial. We have over nearly 70 different multilateral climate funds. So the fragmented nature of climate financing is a challenge, but also access, of course, is a substantial challenge. There are many, many more issues. I can't actually go into all the details, but want to focus on this fragmented, or point to the fragmented nature of climate financing. But also the fragmented nature does not only mean on a vertical manner between the different climate funds, but also across the different governance levels, and the access, especially to local communities to climate financing is a substantial challenge. And what we see here also in terms of fragile contexts or contexts that are affected by destabilizing processes is that there's a risk of strengthening the executive, the state. The state has access to potentially also climate financing, while civil society organizations, are usually the ones who are in a context earlier as well as stay longer. So here, strengthening the executive also runs the risk, of course, to further undermine the abilities of local communities and also civil society organizations to move forward on climate adaptation, but also mitigation. It's true for both. And in the moment of when the disasters hit, of course, that's especially problematic when then the executive, so the state, is strengthened at a potential cost for the civil society organizations. So here, again, for climate financing, the fragmented nature on a vertical level as well as across the governance levels are challenged. And yes, substantially more mobilizing for climate financially, but also in terms of political will is very much needed. Thanks.
Thank you. Again, a question to Mr. D'Onofrio, because if we talk about the finance of climate change adaptation, we will mostly focus on donor perspective. It's dominated with donor discussion, me as a media as well. How can we make sure that the people or the institutions in the fragile and the conflict affected area can share their opinion or ideas for the donor? What do you think? What is an idea? Or do you have any proposal for this?
No, that's a great question. Thank you. So I think there are many ways to get at that issue, and perhaps one of the most obvious is about how we go about doing anything that we do. So speaking, collecting data, engaging, listening. But all of that costs money and takes time. And so I think for me there are three ways that we can approach this, right? It's about what we do, it's about how we do it, and it's about when we do it. And each of those has a differential effect on people's lives. So from the what we do point of view, one of the things that I think is very interesting in all of this kind of, in a sense, irrespective of the type of problem we are trying to deal with, one of the things that we can do as international actors, as local actors, as people working in collaboration, is to put power into the hands of the recipient. And this is why I love cash assistance in whatever form it comes in. And we can talk about different forms if time allows us. But cash assistance is about investing in people's choices, and it's about giving people power. Now, just today, by complete coincidence, an open letter was issued by CALP, a collection of experts on cash, expressing grave concern about the retreat of cash assistance in fragile and conflict-affected settings. This has been in decline for a couple of years, even before reductions in aid this year. And that's fundamentally problematic. It means we're doing proportionally less cash assistance as a set of interventions, and that's fundamentally problematic. And then the other thing that we can do to really help put power in people's hands is look at when we intervene. And this is where I think we get to some very interesting questions about disaster risk finance, about innovative financial instruments that can help us intervene earlier, and again, put power into people's hands to make good decisions sooner, protect assets, and take evasive action in the face of impending shocks.
Thank you. Ms. Womitsu, I think the African risk capacity is very active on the ground, and you are very known for contributing to expand the insurance parametric. So what are the key benefits of this method compared to the traditional one?
Thank you so much. I think maybe first to address your question, it could be great to maybe remember or remind what is the mandate of African Risk Capacity. So African Risk Capacity, you already mentioned, Special Agency of the African Union. We have been established to help government, but we even go beyond government today. We also help humanitarian agencies, smallholder farmers directly to better prepare, plan and response to extreme weather events and natural disaster. So we have two kinds of assistance, pre-event and post-event. Pre-event will be about preparedness, where we will be focusing on building long-term resilience through capacity building, making available the tools, and also doing contingency planning. And then the second part will be post-event through insurance, where we will be paying claims when the event happens, and also mobilizing financing, because we know paying premium is not something very always affordable. As climate shock become more frequent and severe, when natural disaster strikes, such as flood, drought, heatquake, or tropical cyclone, countries often rely on humanitarian help and post-crisis help, but this will be delayed. This has become now too slow, too uncertain, and also too expensive. So at ARC Limited, so at African Risk Capacity, we believe on innovation. We believe that innovation in insurance and also in pre-arranged financing is key to protect life and livelihood. Now, why parametric insurance and not traditional insurance? Because traditional insurance will only come and will only focus on post-disaster event, but we will need somebody to come and to assess the risk before we can disburse the claims. And this can take time, and it's not adapted most of the time in the circumstance we are looking at. So, but we need faster, more predictable tools that will help vulnerable people and communities to respond without waiting for help to arrive. This is where parametric insurance comes in. Unlike traditional insurance, parametric insurance which will pay normally after damage is assessed. Parametric insurance, will be based on rainfall level, or even seism activities, for example. And when the threshold is crossed, then the payout is triggered. Then we will pay directly. So it's just, there is no delay, no negotiation, it's fast, it's transparent, and objective.
Could you mention maybe one representative examples for this, and maybe do you have some proposal to expand this solution?
Yes, so we have been in this industry for 11 years now. And having just one example, I think it's restricted, but we don't have time, of course. But what I can already tell you is that over the 11 years, we have paid more than 200 million in claims, providing 1 billion insurance coverage, and protected over 30 million people at macro, meso, and even micro level. So we operate in 39 countries, and we have 20 countries that have at least taken once an insurance policy. And among these 20 policies, all of them have received at least once a claims payout. Last year, I will just give two examples, if you allow me. So 2 years ago, that was El Niño year. So El Niño years, many countries have been affected by drought. So countries such as Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, they received more than 70 million claims to respond to the devastated season crop that they have faced. But our intervention is going beyond just agricultural sector. We have partnered with International Rescue Committee to develop it's something for education sector, where we have designed an insurance project in Kenya that will help to reduce the growing impact of climate-related crises on school, children, and communities. So with that, we really expect that this will increase the volume of finance and speed of disbursement after a climate event, to address school closure, and also to increase the number of children, including girls, children with disabilities, with providing them with high-quality education during and even after climate-related school closure. So these are the two examples that I can already give, but we have much more. We are also focusing now on anticipatory action because we know how anticipatory action is also important to even act before the event happen, and that can help some farmers to replant before the season ends.
Thank you. Maybe Mr. D'Onofrio, could you give us, share us, maybe from your side, one representative example which have led more effective humanitarian support?
Great. So, I mean, just to echo first, I think the parametric insurance is a very interesting experiment that we're involved in, experiment from our side, where it's new to us, where ARC is bringing in great insights and capacity, and where we can then bring the ability to disperse cash quickly once the insurance is triggered, and the ability to add other services, so this remote early learning to help children catch up with missed school in the event of a trigger. But coming back to what I was saying before about the importance of anticipatory action, we've had some very interesting and innovative work done in Guatemala, in Somalia, in Afghanistan, dealing with floods in Guatemala and drought in Somalia and Afghanistan, and innovative in the sense of the approach that we've taken, which we call follow the forecasts, is to really use publicly available weather forecasting data, AI-assisted, to really dig into and analyze future threats. And that's innovative in the sense that traditionally the attempts to really engage in anticipatory action have tended to build early warning systems rooted in the historical challenges that a country or region has faced. And the problem with historical challenges in a context of a rapidly changing climate is they're sometimes wrong. And so we have found that taking this much more sort of nimble, adaptive approach to intervention has really, really helped speed of delivery and getting cash to affected households, and we can drill down to very, very specific level, given the improvements in information processing in the AI age. We can really dig down and identify the most likely to be affected areas right down to the household level, and that has helped some very, very rapid and specific forms of intervention that have saved lives and saved livelihoods as a result.
Thank you. I will go back to the donors' perspective. State Secretary Mr. Naanen, and Germany is one of the biggest contributors in climate change. But donors tend to avoid the conflict-related area. How we could solve this structural problem? What do you think? You have any ideas?
Well, first of all, I think what your question is expressing is something that really needs to be underlined, because the fragile context, and especially the fragile context which are directly affected by conflicts and by war, by internal and external factors. These regions receive as little as $2 per capita in climate finance. And I mean, that's the external or the conflict-related complication. But we all know that most of those fragile regions are especially vulnerable to climate change. So that needs to be addressed. And I do think that, I mean, we have been talking a lot about mobilizing private capital here in Hamburg. And we need to find a way to mobilize private capital also in those contexts. But we should not kid ourselves. I mean, that's not going to happen without the international community and states to a certain extent enabling those investments, giving guarantees, and if necessary, making their own investments. I think that's just the reality. But the other part of my answer is very straightforward. If the international community is not re-engaging in solving those conflicts, even the best strategy to mobilize private capital in fragile states will not be sufficient. even in, right now, it seems utopic, no? But even an increase in ODA spending will not solve the conflict. And that what concerns me so much is that there are ideas, there are concepts, we're putting money into that as well. But we need a strong and legitimate United Nations. We need to remind the Security Council that it's unacceptable that those conflicts in Sudan, in Yemen, right now also in Gaza and other parts, Horn of Africa, are continuing and even increasing the amount of violence and forcibly displaced persons. So yes, we need to address that, but we also should not forget that we need to address the question of what, when I was growing up, was called peacemaking.
Thank you. Before we open the question and answer section, the last question to Ambassador, I would like to mention another structural problem, because private sector is less appetite to take more risk currently. This structural problem will be mentioned in COP30. What do you think?
Well, you're quite right. Private sector would be less likely. I think, especially in countries with concentrated problems such as conflict and war. I think the State Secretary addressed this issue well, but I think also that we need to empower more regional organizations. In the case of Africa, clearly the African Union is a very powerful instrument, but does not have the resources many times. And the sub-regional entities in Africa, the same. And I think this is something that we could shape from the United Nations. Of course, everything is a little more fragile now, we know that, but we also know that we can do many things together. And I think this issue can only be solved at different layers. Obviously, the private sector has a fundamental role to play, but it's also obvious, and I think this is something we can take at the personal basis, at the business basis, at a national basis, which is if our problems depend on somebody else, then they're not going to be solved. There needs to be ownership, and as has been said by the finance minister, the vice chancellor today, and by Mr. D'Onofrio now, ownership is very important. And of course, for that, we need to have some latitudes, fiscal and budgetary latitudes in countries that need to make these investments. And of course, with the level of indebtedness that they have, it's very difficult to have this latitude. So all of these things have to work together. If you don't have the latitude, you cannot attract investments which are necessary. And all the climate issue will require very strongly private sector participation. It's not possible to face this challenge without incorporating the private sector. Now, you have to make it attractive. Governments can sometimes go beyond that, but not the private sector. They need to have, and so the countries need to have some flexibility in relation to what they can do. And the ownership issue, again, is something very important. This is all rhetorical, but this is a very tough issue. This is one of the most complicated challenges that we face on very fragile countries, sometimes inviable countries that need to have, and of course, inviable countries are very complicated. So it's something that requires global attention. What we can do, there are so many issues in COP. We have to concentrate on broad issues, especially the ones that are going to bring everybody together, because we need a show of strength, of unity and commitment on the multilateral level. We cannot bring many divisive issues to the front if we want to have this result, okay? And this one can be sometimes a little problem, but it's also a challenge that has to be faced. I think all of the issues that have been touched upon need to be mentioned. I would mention one further, which is the multilateral development banks. They have to be empowered also to be able to deal with that. They have the private sector arms, which can be very important, including in bringing the private sector. Just as an example, Brazil is not in the same level, it's much higher, has the ability to cope. We had tremendous climate issues in the southern part of Brazil in different parts of the year. And a major challenge, 94% of all the municipalities in the southernmost most state of Brazil were flooded. And the private sector is responding because they know they have to anticipate. They know they have to deal. Of course, Brazil is different, okay? But it's something that can be done at a different level. And we also need, and this is the task force, we also need adequate policies. It's not just money, it's the adequate approach. All of this has to be done. And of course, as I said, the task force that derived from the alliance that was generated in the G20 meeting in Brazil is not really focusing on financing. It's focusing on policies that can be adequate to overcome poverty and hunger, and in many times, these types of fragilities that affect these countries.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Ambassador. So a little bit running late, but I will open for the question answer for the audience. Please raise your hand and state your name and the organization, and please mention the name of the panelist for your question. Who would you like to ask first question? Who want to break the ice?
Hello.
Good.
Hi. Hi. I'm Manal. I'm a youth climate activist. My question is for everyone. Within youth climate activist spaces, we are very worried about private finance. We think it's a dangerous distraction from the main source of climate finance, which should be public funding. We think that this attention that is given to private sector MDBs is very controversial, and we should be instead worrying about governments, especially historical polluters, who should be putting in money from public funding sources. So I want to know what you think about that, especially because private finance, there's a lot of risks for greenwashing. Some finance can come from big polluters, from fossil fuel industries. They can just pay their way out, their pollution, like greenwashing, basically. And it's very different when you have private finance. They think about profit, not people. So I want to know if you have, I know the main panel was all about private finance, so I want to know what you think about this.
Could you mention one panelist for your question? Thank you.
Maybe anyone who would like to take the question, but
I can.
Then Mr. Anand, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, yes.
Yes, sure.
Thank you for your questions. I can speak from private sector point of view, since we are private. For example, in our case, we are not just a private insurance, but we have the status of development insurer. So if you take our example, for example, we really try to work hand in hand with the government, but also with all the stakeholders, going from the top to the bottom. So that means working with the government, working with communities as well, where we engage with smallholder farmers. We are doing a lot of effort in ESG, where because we understand that it's really important to make sure that we are not increasing or making more pollution in this world. So we are really trying to make more sustainable in everything that we are doing. For now, as an insurance, what we really the message that we are trying to vehicle is that insurance is not the only way, for example, to respond to a disaster that comes. It should be seen as one of the innovative instrument, and that can also help you because in advance you will have the information how to pre-arrange financing, how to design your contingency planning. So when the events happen, you have already a plan how you can respond, and we are supporting you on this. So I think it's not too much to see how to involve the private sectors because we work hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you for indulging. My name is Monika Fröhler. I'm the CEO of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. So I have the privilege of working for the former Secretary General. And I want to simply comment, thank you so much for raising the flag for multilateralism. It is needed in this complex era. And Germany, thank you so much for supporting the issue of adaptation. Because what we see is that so little financing actually goes to adaptation, and particularly to agricultural adaptation. So thank you for your great work on that. Only 0.8% of climate finance goes to smallholder farmers. My question is the following. If we fast forward to COP and to Belém, what would you want to see as a key takeaway that we can help with to actually achieve in COP? And the same question goes actually to you, dear State Secretary, to Germany. What would you consider success at COP?
Is that first, Ambassador?
Well, you know, this COP does not have an agenda for that. Previous COPs were directed to a certain subject. This is an open COP. I think that what can be considered an achievement is to having the cohesion to reach solutions in general is the focal point I mentioned before. To ensure that multilateralism is at its best and it can provide, of course, it's where is it going to be in financing? Financing is not from Baku to Belém. It's from Bonn to whenever we're going to find. It's a continuous road that's not going to end in Belém, of course. But I think the achievement is to bring people together, especially countries together, and show that multilateralism works, and we're going forward on that. No specific point can be really mentioned.
Yes, Henry?
Well, I can add to that, but you already mentioned adaptation, and I think that's very important. And also the point of how do we reach the most fragile, vulnerable regions under the new quantitative goal, that would be considered important from my point of view. But I would add to Roberto that I do think, you know, if we show the global community, in spite of all the pressures that we have, that multilateralism is able to deliver and to maintain that process. I mean, that doesn't maybe sound like a very high ambition, but that would be very important. And we showed that the WHO was able to deliver in spite of all the things that happened. And so I think also with the leadership of our Brazilian friends, with the support of our government and many like-minded civil society and the private sector, if I may say, we will be able to make Belém a success.
Thank you. We collect on two questions. We will correct two questions.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe the three corrections, and then we will finish this
Thank you
session.
very much.
Very short, three.
Thank you very much.
Very short.
Alois that is my name from Tanzania. I'm a pastoralist Maasai elder who is in the front line of climate change. My question is, while I like the whole idea of multilateralism, I don't like the way decisions are made to the people who are confronted with massive, difficult, urgent decision-making processes. She spoke about AU. While I come from the same continent, I think the structures, the systems, the way of thinking to address the key problems of the world today is delayed by the same structures, systems, ways of thinking, which, in my opinion, we need thoroughly a scenario planning. I give an example. I'm a pastoralist.
Sorry, could you mention a question, please?
The question is, we need scenario, not only one scenario, one way of thinking, but various scenarios to address unpredictable impacts of climate change.
Thanks a lot for posing this question. This one goes a bit to Germany in this case. I'm coming from a flood region in Germany, from Ahrweiler. So this was one of the most expensive floods in the past 10 years, according to Munich Re. It wasn't the worst around the world. It was just so expensive. We are still not adapted. It was all built on the same place because insurance would only pay to build the houses again at the same place. Is this economical viable? I would say no. And another one here is, we build right now in Germany.
Sorry, what was in the question?
Okay, so the question
Yeah,
is about,
question.
should we even allow to rebuild the houses at the same place, or should we consider to make money available, for example, to also replace the people?
Then, ladies, very short question, right? Only question, please.
Very short.
Yeah.
Now, this is to Anna Katharina. You spoke about deals and the fact that they undermine multilateralism. But coming from a small island state, when we need urgent action for the impact of climate change, such as devastation from hurricanes, we have to speak to bilateral partners because the multilateral system is too slow. If you do not agree with deal making, what do you suggest for countries such as mine? And I'm from Jamaica.
Yeah, thanks.
Then Mr. Nannen and Professor.
Okay, very briefly, I'm not sure if I'm prepared to answer your question in detail, because this is also up to the insurance companies. But there, as I'm sure you're well aware, that within Germany there is a new debate about a new kind of insurance against fundamental risks. That is very complicated in a federal republic. But I can only repeat what I said before. I mean, we have been working as development cooperation with our partners in the Global South on solutions that I mentioned, the global risk against climate, global shield against climate risk, which is not precisely an insurance, but it's what we call pre-arranged finance. I do think that we should, as Germany, also look into those kind of instruments that have been developed for other contexts and regions, but are innovative and offer maybe partly a solution. But there are many lessons to be learned here, but I lack the detailed knowledge about the conditions for rebuilding the houses in beautiful Ahrweiler.
Then Professor Hornet, please.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, obviously, there are many good cases for bilateral cooperation, no? But bilateral cooperation is not the deal-making that I'm referring to. Deal-making is a pattern that we see increasingly where big countries take on a deal or, establish the modus of operandi to engage in deals, bilateral deals, with usually much smaller countries, basically in many ways also undermining then the negotiation strategy or negotiation power of the smaller countries. So it's what we see is that there's a might override tendency. The logic is changing. Yeah? It's no longer reliable, or at most of the time reliable rules for all, irrespective of size, of economic power, of geographic position, of demographic development, etc. Yeah? But it depends on which position you are in to strike a deal. And that, of course, is an undermining. Now, for an island or small island development states in dealing with climate change, of course, there's many good cases made for then bilateral interaction, but of course also the multilateral tools here apply. Yeah? If you look at the agreements for then also bringing in SIDS and being part of the climate negotiations and moving forward here, just as much as the bilateral agreements to resettle. I just want to mention to the climate activists, if I may, I mean, I can understand the concern about private financing, but anyway, I mean, obviously we can only battle the climate crisis if we mobilize substantially more finances. There's no way of doing that through public channels. And I think that has to be taken into account. Anyway.
Just a brief response to our friend from Tanzania.
Yeah.
We have a total concern with your issue. That's why, for many years, Brazil has developed a very focal issue to listening to the civil society. And we have developed many systems for that, beginning with the forum in Porto Alegre, the social forum in Porto Alegre. And for the COP30, the Minister for Indigenous Peoples in Brazil, Sônia Guajajara, has a special responsibility of listening to all other like-minded countries in the world in this issue to bring forth their own concerns and how to deal with this issue because of the competence and knowledge, especially from local native indigenous tribes in relation to the issue of climate change and how to deal with these issues. And so this is very much part of our COP30.
Thank you for the comment, and thank you very much for all attendees. And I would like to express my deep gratitude to all the participants here. And thank you very much for all the audience for sharing your time here and all the questions. Thank you very much. See you. Bye.